Hi, and welcome to Advanced Python, offered to you by the Clifton Park Half Moon Library. Um, uh, I'm not sure if you were able to take my Python Fundamentals class offered last month, and if not, you'll have a little bit of making up to do um, because we are in this class we are going on to advanced functionality of the Python language. And let's see. This will be a 3-session class, and each pre-recorded video will be 1 hour and will be presented to you at 7 o'clock through YouTube. And when you register with the Clifton Park Half Moon Library, you will I will enter your email address and invite you to the Google Classroom, which will have exercises and some reference material for you to be able to view and work on. You'll also be able to communicate with me through Google Classroom if you have any questions about Python or the exercises. If you look at my screen, off to the left, I've opened up the text editor that we're going to be using in the class, and that is called IDLE, I-D-L-E. And once you download Python to your computer, just go out to python.org and you download whatever 3 point whatever version is out there now, the latest and greatest. Download it to your computer, and once you do that, you'll have the computer will have access to the IDLE text editor. And off to the right of my screen, I have what is called the command line for Python, which is called the Python shell. So the Python shell is where you're going to see any errors that come up, or you can enter commands into the Python shell. So if you look into off to the right of my screen, you can see that the Python shell has the prompt has 3 greater than signs, and I can enter commands like I can do 1 plus 1, right? And I hit enter, and it will say 2. Or I should say, I should create a variable, and I should say age equals 56. Hit enter, and then say I want to print out whatever the value of age is, right? You do print, parenthesis, age, it's a variable name, and then end parenthesis. If I hit enter, it's going to return 56. Right? That's the value of age. So in the Python shell, you can do single commands, 1 line at a time. That's why they call it the command line. And also it will generate any errors. It will give clues to what's wrong with your program if it doesn't work. Now, to the left is the idle screen. So here we're going to enter actual Python programs. So multiple lines of code that will be bundled up into a file with an extension of .py for Python. And we can run these files and generate output. So why don't we talk about, let's just do a quickie review from the Python Fundamentals class. I know that I finished up with complex conditionals, and which was using and or when you're using if, elif, and else. So why don't we just do a quick review of if, elif, and else, which are called conditionals, right? Because they are based on a condition being true. Okay, so if you look over in the left, I've got my idle screen up. So say I create a variable named A, and I give it a value of 33. Then I create a variable named B, give it a value of 200. Now I'm going to do an if statement. All right. If B is greater than A, which greater than A, and you have to end the conditional with a colon, then, and notice when I hit enter and you go down to the next line, it automatically indents. In Python, indentation is crucial. Without it, your programs will blow up. All right, so if, and I'll do a print. So if B is greater than A, which B is 200, and A has a value of 33, so this is going to be true, then we're going to print, double quotes, B is greater than A, double quotes, and parentheses. All right, so now I'm going to, actually I don't have to do that, but to run our Python programs through idle, through our text editor idle, you, in the toolbar, we're going to click on run, and then we'll click on run module. All right, that will run. First, it's going to ask you to save the current program that you're on. I'll say okay. And then I'm going to create a folder called Advanced Python. I already have one. All right, so I'll do a new folder. And so I created a folder called Advanced Python. And down at the file name, I'm going to call this conditional review, w.py. Every Python program has the extension .py. And if you look at the save as type, I already have Python files. So I'll do a save. And the output goes into the Python shell. So if you look at the right, I have my Python shell window open, and the output is B is greater than A, which is true, right? If B is greater than A, then I want to print B is greater than A. All right, so let's do an elif. Elif. How about A why don't we create something new? How about I'll create another variable called C. C, and C is going to equal 300. So elif C is greater than B. Colon, you have to end your conditional with a colon, hit enter, and I'm going to do a print of the string C is greater than B. Quotes, parenthesis, and let's run this real quick. So run module. Once I click, I've already saved the file one time. I've saved it as conditional review.py. So when I click OK, it'll save it, and it will run it. So if you look in the Python shell, B is greater than A, right? And the reason why that happened is, so it comes down to the if statement. And if this is true, then it ends the conditional. It never even, since B is greater than A, that is true, it never even had a chance to do the elif. So what we'll do is we'll make B less than A, so it gets by that if statement, right? So now, if B is greater than A, well, it's not now, because B is 20 and A is 33. So it'll come down to the elif. So go up to the toolbar in idle, and you click run, and then the third one down, run module, and then click OK, it'll save it and run it. So now, since the if statement is not true, it drops down to the elif statement. So elif C, which is 300, greater than B, which is only 20, so that's true, and it prints C is greater than B. And lastly, with conditionals, we want an else, right? We want to catch everything else. So it's else, colon, and that's it. So what do we want to print, if that's true? We'll do a print statement. So it's print, parenthesis, what goes inside, for a print statement, what goes inside the parentheses is what you want to print. So print, we're going to do, we'll say everything else. Quotes and parentheses, okay? So how can we make that true? We have to make the if statement false, which it already is. We have to make the elif statement false if C is greater than B. So we'll make C only 3. And that'll drop down to everything else. All right, so run the module. Okay. And if you look at the Python shell, off to the right of my screen, it says everything else, right? So it hit this else condition. All right. Now I want to talk about complex conditions. All right, so complex conditions are where you're using conditionals like, like if, elif, and else, but you're looking at 2 conditionals at one time. So if we're dealing with an and condition, then, let me just pause. So since, now that we're going to talk about complex conditions, I'm going to right click, or I'm going to click on File on my idle screen, and I'm going to do a Save As, because I want this to be in another file. So down at File Name, I'm going to do complex condition. All right. .py. Save. All right, so now I have a new file called complex conditions or conditionals.py. All right, so let's say we make A 200. I'll make the variable B have a value of 33. Remember, variables in Python, like actually in every language, I want you to visualize variables as just being containers. So you give the container a name, and you put something inside the container. So A is a variable. That's the name of the variable is A. And what I put in this A container is 200, the number 200. B is a container named B, and I put 33 in that container. And then C is a container name, and I'm putting 500 into that container. All right, so let's get rid of this stuff. All right, so if A is greater than B, right? And we use the word and because we're going to have another condition, right? If C is greater than A. And then you have to end the complex conditional with a colon, all right? And it's called complex because you're dealing with more than one condition, right? So when you use the and, both conditions have to be true, all right? So A has to be greater than B, and C has to be greater than A. And what we'll say in our print will be, how about both conditions are true, all right? Let's give it a try, all right? So A is 200, so A is more than 33, so this condition is true. A is greater than B. And C is 500, and that's greater than A, which is 200. So this condition is also true. So our output should say both conditions are true, all right? So I'm going to do a run module, click OK, and this is the first time. So we saved, okay, so both conditions are true. So now let's cover the or. So with the or statement, what I'll do is I'll comment out the and. So in Python, we use by the way you comment out a line. In Python, is to use a hashtag. So I do hashtag, whatever it is. It turns the whole line red because it's just a note, it's a comment. The computer will not run either of these lines that are commented out. So what I'm going to do is I'll do an if, if A is greater than B, or instead of using the and, we're going to do an or, A is greater than C. And always end it with a colon. Hit enter and it automatically indents for you. And now we're going to print. Put my colon back, hit enter. We'll do a print, parenthesis, do double quotes. At least one of the conditions is true. Double quotes and print it. And I'll extend my idle screen a little bit more so we can see. All right, so I'm going to run this now. If A is greater than B, is that true? Is 200 greater than 33? That is correct. Or if A is greater than C, is 200 greater than 500? No, that's not correct. But this will print out, at least it'll say at least one of the conditions is true, because with an or statement, unlike an and both conditions have to be true. And or, only one of the conditions has to be true. So since A is greater than B, the whole statement is true because one of the two conditions is true. So this should print out at least one of the conditions is true. So I'll do a run module. I'll click OK. And if you look off to the right at the bottom of my Python shell, it does say at least one of the conditions is true. So that's what and or complex conditions are all about. Now you can have say I took this if statement, and if A is greater than B, right? So I changed the or to an and I want to use an and an or. So if A is greater than B, and I'll put a parenthesis here to surround the or condition. So, or A is greater than C, or how about B? And with conditionals, you have to use double equals. If you just use a single equal sign, it won't work. So double equals, and say we have it equal to 33. All right? So what we'll do is we'll print out the first condition is true. And one of the or conditions is true. All right. All right. So, what do you think? Is this going to be true or not? So, if you look, the first condition is A greater than B. Is 200 greater than 33? Yes. So this is true. And one of these two has to be true. I don't know if that makes sense, but with an and, both conditions have to be true. So the first one is true. And then the second condition is considered these two conditions because there's an or statement in between them. So only one of these has to be true. Now A is not greater than C, but B is equal to 33. So this one is also true, making the and conditional true. So it should say this long printout. The first is true and one of the blah, blah, blah. All right, so I'll do a run. I'll do the module. Okay. And you get this long printout. If you look at on the right of my screen in the Python shell at the bottom, it printed out the first is true and one of the or conditions is also true. Okay. Now let's do a quick review of the two forms of looping in Python. The first one we're going to cover is the for loop. So I am going to do a file, save as, and create a file called for.py. All right. And here's the format of a for loop. So for loops loop based on a they will loop a certain number of times. So let me just get rid of all this stuff. All right, let's start fresh. So a for loop is the word for, space, and then you have a temporary variable name, and a lot of times you just use x, but you can call it whatever you want. So for x, and then you have the keyword in. Notice as I'm typing too, in my idle session, for is a keyword, so it's in orange. Then the temporary variable is whatever I want it to be, so it's in black. But then the in is a keyword, and that's in orange. And then we're going to call up a function called range, and every function needs parentheses, and then you have to pass it arguments. So I'm calling the function named range, and I'm going to pass it. I'm going to have this loop 5 times. All right. So for x in range, parentheses 5, end parentheses, and just like conditionals, you have to end for loop statements with a colon. When I hit enter, it automatically indents. So now everything indented inside the for loop is what is going to be activated, is what's going to be run. All right. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to print parentheses x. All right. So I want to print the value of x. And the way this works with for loops, x is going to have a value of, the first time you loop through, you would think x would have a value of 1. Well, it doesn't. It has a value of 0. All right, the indexing starts at 0. All right, so the first time through the loop, it'll have 0, and I will print out 0. The second time through the loop, x will have a value of 1. I'll print 1. Third time through, x will have a value of 2. I'll print out 2. The fourth time through the fourth loop, x will have a value of 3. I'll print out 3. And finally, the fifth time it loops, x will have a value of 4, and I'll print out 4. And now, the next time I come up here, I've already looped 5 times. I've told it to loop 5 times with the 5, range, parenthesis 5, end parenthesis. So it won't loop again. It would just end. All right. It says, oh, I've already looped 5 times. All right, my for loop is done. And I'll come down here outside of the for loop. All right. So for loops are used to loop a certain number of times. And we use the range function quite often. Another nice feature about the range function is that you can add multiple arguments for this function. So just by adding 5, I'm telling it to loop that many times. But if I wanted to loop, if I put in the word, the number, say I wanted to start it at 2. All right, so you can do 3 different numbers or 3 different arguments for the range function. So 2, the first number is the number you want to start with. So the first time I loop, x would have a value of 2 instead of a value of 0. All right, the second number is the number you want to end with, not including that number. So say I want to end with, I want to end with 10. So I would put 11, because it will go until 10, and then it will go. This is the ending number, not including itself. So if I wanted to end, I want the last number to possibly be 10, then I would put 11. If I wanted the last number to be 15, then I would put 16. All right. And then the third argument is if you want to increment by something. So say I want to increment by 3. So I'm starting at 2. I'm going up to 15, which is, this number is 16, not including itself. And I'm incrementing by 3. So the first time I'm going to loop, I'm going to print out the number 2. The second time I'm going to loop, I'm going to print out, I'm going to add 3 to it. So 3 plus 2 is 5. So I'll print out the number 5. The third time I loop, I will have 3 plus 5 is 8. Fourth time I loop is 8 plus 3 is 11. Fifth time I loop is 11 plus 3 is 14. And there won't be a sixth time I loop because I'm up to 14. If I looped again, it would be 14 plus the increment of 3, which is 17, which is beyond 16 or 15, which is the ending number. So this is telling me to loop 5 times altogether. And the numbers that I will generate, I will print out, will be 2, 5, 8, 11, and 14. All right, so let's try this. So there's the for loop, so for run module, I'll click OK. And if you look over to the right at the bottom in my Python shell, it generated 2, and then 5, then 8, then 11, then 14. All right. Another way you can loop using the for loop is we can create a list, right? So if I create a list called, why don't I call it colors? I create a list colors is the name of the list equals, and then we do, oops, curly brackets, we do square brackets. And I'll do the colors red and separated with a comma, and then blue, double quotes, comma, and then finally white for 4th of July. White, double quotes, comma, oops. And you end it with a square bracket. All right, that's a list named colors, and it's got 3 items in it, red, blue, and white. All right, so say I want to loop through this list named colors. So I can still use X as a temporary variable. I should change the name to make more sense. I could call it color. When I not confuse you. So I'll just leave it at X, all right? So for X in, instead of using range, we'll get rid of this. We're going to just loop through all the colors in the colors list. So I just call the list name. So for X in, and then the list name, colors. And then you have to end with a colon. Don't forget that. And then we'll print X. And what's going to be printed? The first time we loop, we're going to print the first item of the list, which would be red. Second time we loop, we'll print blue. And third time we loop, we'll print white. All right, so I'll do a run module, click OK. And in my Python shells at the bottom, I print red, blue, and white. All right, so that's enough for the for loop. Let's cover the while loop real quick. So I'll do a file, save as. And I'm going to call this file while.py and enter. All right, so now I'm in a while file. Okay, with the while loop, unlike the for loop, for loop loops based on a certain number of times, where the while loop is based on a condition being true. All right, so I've got a brand new file called while.py, and I'm going to create a variable named I, and I'm going to give it a value of 1. Okay, enter. And now I'll do my while statement. So while, the word while, see how it turns orange? While I is less than 5. Oops, less than 5. And then you have to end the while loop with a colon, just like the for loop, just like the if, the elif, and the else statements. They all end in colons. All right, you hit enter and it automatically indents. So what we put inside the while loop is what will be run. All right, so as long as I is less than 5, and right now I is set to 1, so that's going to be true, right? Then I'm going to print I. Print parentheses I. And then I'll hit enter. And what I want to do, if I don't increment I by 1 or whatever, I have to increment it by something. Otherwise, this will loop forever. What is known as an infinite loop. So I have to increment I. And you could write this statement as I equals I plus 1, right? That would add 1 to I. But an easier shorthand way to write it in Python is I plus equal 1. All right, that increments I by 1. It's just easier to write. So I plus equal 1 will add 1 to it. So first time I loop, I equals 1. Is I less than 5? This condition is now true. So I'm going to come down here, I'm going to print I. So I would print 1. Now I is equal to 1, so I'm adding 1 to 1. So now I equals 2. I come back up to my while loop. Is 2 less than 5? Yes. I print out I, which is 2. 2 plus 1 is 3. Come back to the while loop. 3 less than 5? Yes. I'll print out 3. And then 3 plus 1 is 4. Come back to the while loop. Is 4 less than 5? Yes. I print out 4. I add 1 more to it. Now I equals 5. I come up to the while loop. Is 5 less than 5? No. And it ends my while loop, and I would come back down here, outside of the while loop. All right, so let's give this a try. And I should print out the numbers 1, 2, 3, and 4. So I run module, click OK. If you look over to the right in my Python session, you can see the numbers 1, 2, 3, and 4. So it looped 4 times, right? And it was all based on I being less than 5. Once that condition becomes not true, the while loop ends. And that's the difference between a while loop and a for loop. Okay, now let's go into the wonderful world of functions in Python. All right, functions are amazing. And what I'm going to do, I'll do a file, save as, I'll create a brand new file, and then I'll call it functions.py. Hit enter. All right, so I've got a brand new file called functions. All right, I'll clear that out. And functions in Python. A function is a block of code which only runs when it is called. You can pass data known as parameters into a function. A function can also return data as a result. All right, so in Python, creating a function, we have to use the keyword def, D-E-F, which is an abbreviation for definition. So we're going to define our function. All right, so it's the format for defining a function is DEF. You notice in my idle session, DEF is orange because it's a keyword in Python. And then we're going to call this, let's call it my function. Right? Now I'm using camel case. I don't know if, as far as naming variables, functions, whatever, I like to use camel case, which is the first letter of the first word. So in this case, my is everything's lowercase. And then every word after that, the first letter is capitalized. So the second word in my function name is function. So I capitalize the F, just so the words stand out in whatever name you're using. All right, so the format to define a function is def space and then the function name followed by a parenthesis. And what goes inside the parentheses are called parameters. All right, these are variables. So for now, I'm not going to pass any parameters, but you still have to have the open and close parenthesis. And like most commands in Python, you have to have a colon at the end. All right. So I'll hit enter and it indents inside my function. And what we put in the function is what's going to be executed, just like what you put in a conditional or what you put in a loop, a for loop or a while loop. That's what's going to be run. So I'm going to do a print. Now print, the print command in Python is used heavily when you want to debug your program or if you want to display information. But you should really rely on the print to help you try to figure out any kind of problems that you're having. So in this case, I'm just going to display information to prove that I'm inside my brand new function called my function. So I'll say, hey, hello from my function, double quotes, and parentheses. Okay, so now I have the function created. So the way to get that block of code for the function, the way to get it to actually run is you have to call it. Just like if I was going to call somebody on the telephone, first thing I would do is I would use their name, right? So I call them up on the telephone and I say, hey, Jim. Same thing here. You want to call the function by calling it by name, right? Otherwise, the computer would have no idea who you were calling, right? So the way to call a function is just use their name, right? And then followed by parentheses. And now inside these parentheses would be arguments, which are values for the most part. All right. In this case, we don't have to pass any arguments because when we defined our function up here, we don't have any parameters. So nothing has to be passed, but you always have to have the open and close parentheses when you're defining the function and when you're calling the function. All right. So open and close parentheses simply means it's empty. So there are no arguments and there are no parameters. All right, that's it. So when I run this, the computer will look at my function, my package of code, and it'll say, okay, that's nice. And then it will come down to this line and say, all right, now I'm calling that function. I want it to run. And so down here, I'm calling the function. The way it works is the computer will come up to the function, wherever it was defined, and then it will take the arguments that you pass it, and it will put them in parameters, into variables. The arguments become values for the parameters or variables in your function, and then it will print. It will print. It will do whatever your function wants it to do. All right. So let's do a run of this, and I'll show you how it works. Okay, so it runs. If you look over to the right in my Python shell session, at the bottom it says hello from my function, right? All right, so now let's take a look at, let's say you look at using parameters and arguments for functions, all right? So arguments. All right. So, say we have, all right, so I'm going to change our function name to be, well, I'm going to call it the name function. Because we're going to mess with names. All right, so name function, def name function, parentheses, and this time I'm going to have a parameter. So I'm going to call this F name, so for first name, right? Actually, why don't I use, I'm going to have two parameters. So I'm going to have F name, and I'm going to also have L name for last name. If I can spell. All right, so I've got two parameters now with a function called name function. All right, so inside, I'm going to do a print. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to do F name, right? So I call the variable or the parameter F name. Whatever the value is put inside F name, inside that container, it will be printed out. All right, I use a comma to concatenate. And then I'll do a double quote because I'm going to do a space. And then I will do another comma, and then I'll do L name. All right, so it'll print first name, space, and then last name. So that's our function called name function, all defined and ready to go. So what I have to do now is I have to call it. So the name of my function here is name function. All right, and inside the parentheses, I have to pass values, right? So I have to pass a value, an argument that will get sent up to where I define my function. So I need an argument for F name, so I need a first name. I need an argument for last name. All right, so if I pass no arguments, this will blow up, right? So I'm calling my function, but I've got open and closed parentheses, so I'm passing in no arguments. So if I ran this, it would blow up. So let's do a run, my module, click OK, and boom. This is what an error looks like in the Python shell. It's all in red. It tells me what file I'm working on. It tells me what line. So the error is on line number 6, right? So 1. If I look at my program, I've got 1, 2. Let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6, right? So the error is on my call to the function. And actually it even tells me the line number. So if you look in the Python shell, it says line 6, and then the next line it says name function parentheses. So it tells me what's on line 6 and where the error is coming from. And then it tells me a type error. It says name function parentheses missing 2 required positional arguments, F name and L name. It tells me so much in the error. If you learn how to read what Python throws back, when you understand the clues that it gives you, it's very easy to pinpoint your problem and to fix it. So we're missing 2 arguments, right? We need an F name and we need an L name. So I will put, I'll pass a string. I will pass a first name. How about Mike? My first name, and then you concatenate it with a comma, and then the quotes, and we'll call it Larson, Mike Larson. The quotes, and we'll run it now. So now I'm passing 2 arguments. Mike will be the value that goes into the parameter F name. Larson will be the value that goes into the parameter L name. And when this function called name function runs, it will print out first name, space, and a last name. So let's give it a try. So we have run, a module. So if you look at my Python shell at the bottom, I've got Mike, space, Larson. All right. So functions are amazing. I mean, they're packages of code that are totally portable too. If you had this big long function that you wrote in Python in one program, so say, I've got it in my program called functions.py, but I should use this function somewhere else in another one of my programs. All I have to do is copy the code and then push it into my other program. So it's extremely portable blocks of code that you can use. And if you remember from the for loop example, right? So say you had a for loop, a for x in range, parentheses, and then, I don't know if you remember, but we had 2, comma, what do we do? 16, comma, 3. And parentheses, right? And then a colon. So range is a function, right? And we're calling, in our for loop, we're doing for x in, and then we're calling the range function, right? And when we call it, we pass parameters or arguments. And these arguments are values, right? So the first one is the number 2, and that is an argument for the starting point. Second number is the value of 16, and that's the ending point, not including itself. And then the third number is how much you want to increment by. All right, so here's just an example. We use functions all the time, and in all programming languages. So that's just an example, the range function. I'll get rid of that. So what if I wanted to pass a whole list as an argument. So, all right, so I've got, I'm going to start all over. So what I need to do first is I need to create my function. Now remember, the function, you cannot call a function, you can't make the call to a function before the function is defined. So you want your functions defined towards the top of your program. All right, so the first thing we'll do is we'll define a function. So def, and we're going to call this my food function. All right, so it's def space function name parentheses, and then we're going to pass it parameters. All I'm going to do is you can name the parameter whatever you want, right? The parameter is a variable name. All right, so in this case, I'm going to call it food. But I should call it America, I should call it ocean, whatever I want. It helps to have a name, to name the parameter that makes sense for your function in your program. And don't forget, you have to end the statement with a colon. Hit enter, and it indents automatically for me. And then inside the function, I'm going to do a for loop. So for x in food, right? So food is the name of the parameter of my function, and the value that's going to go into the parameter named food is going to be a whole list. All right, so for x in food, and then double quotes, colon, hit enter, and now I'm indented inside the for loop, right? And what I want to do is I want to print out the list. Each item in the list, one at a time. And that's going to be it for my function named food function, all right? So I've got my function all created and defined up above. Now I need a list. So I'm going to call this list, let me call it groceries. Equals. And the way to create a list is you do list name, space, equals, space, and then square brackets. And then I'll put a few items in here, the bread, comma, and then butter, comma. And then lastly, I'm going to have bread, butter, and milk. Quotes, and then you have to close your list out with a square bracket. And if you notice in idle, once I put that ending square bracket, the whole list turns gray and highlighted in gray, and that means that it's good. The code is good, it's valid. All right, so I'll hit enter. Now I have to call my function named food function. So I'll call it. So all you do when you call a function is you call it by name. So you do the function name, parentheses, and then the argument I'm passing is the name of the list. So the name of the list in this program is groceries. So groceries, parentheses, and that's it. And that should work. And so I'm passing the list name groceries. That's my argument, right? And that has 3 items, bread, butter, and milk. And so groceries will come up to my function named food function. It will dump the grocery list into a parameter named food. And then inside the function, it will do a for loop. So for x in food, so it's going to loop over the list. So it will loop 3 times, right? Because there's 3 items in my list, bread, butter, and milk. The first time, x will have a value of bread. The second time I loop, x will have a value of butter. And the third time I loop, x will have a value of milk. And that's what's going to be printed out one at a time. So my output in the Python shell will be bread, butter, and milk. Let's give it a try. So I'll do run module, okay. Yep, if you look at the bottom of my Python shell, it's generated bread, butter, and milk. So there's one more thing about functions I want to talk about. And what that is the return. All right, so this is a pretty simple concept to understand. So I can get rid of my list. Okay, actually I'll get rid of everything. I'll start fresh. Actually, what I'm going to do is save as, and I'll call this function return, this file, .py. Every Python has an extension of .py, every Python program. All right, so now we have a fresh program called function return.py. And to demonstrate a return from a function, I will do, first I'll define my function. So I do def, and then I'll call this one my function again. So that's my function name, parentheses, x. So my parameter is named x in this case, colon at the end, hit enter. And then inside my function, here's where I'm going to do my return statement. So return space, see how the word return is a keyword and turns orange just like the word def. So I've got return, and say I did 5, and I use asterisk for multiplication, 5 times whatever the value of x is. Remember, x is my parameter. And when I call my function, I will pass a value that will be loaded into the variable named x. So return 5 times x, right? Now, I'm going to print my call to the function. So if I print parentheses, and then inside the parentheses, I'm going to call my function. So my function, parenthesis, and then now I have to pass it a value, right? I have to pass it an argument that will get loaded up in the function into the variable named x. So first I'm going to pass the value 3, parentheses. Now this is a number, so I'm not wrapping it, the argument, in double quotes. It's not a string, just a plain old number. All right. So if I run this, then the way it works is I've got my function defined here, and then the computer will come down to this print statement and it'll say, okay, print what? Oh, inside the parentheses, you want me to call the function named my function and pass in an argument of 3. So when it does that, you're calling the function, you're passing it 3, it comes up to the function and puts the value of 3 into the variable named s, or the parameter named s. And then inside the function, it's going to return whatever 5 times x is. So in this case, x is going to have a value of 3. So 5 times 3 is 15. It's going to return 15. Whenever a function is called, you go up to the function, you do what's inside the function. When the function's done, it goes back to where you called it. Now, if you have a return statement in, it's going to return something back to where you called it. If you don't have a return statement, it will go back to the function, but it will just go back to that function call, and then it will move on to the next line. So when I run this, it should return 5 times 3, which is 15. So it's going to print out whatever that call was, passing the argument of 3. So it'll print 15. So let's do a run module. Enter. Oh, unexpected error. So sometimes when you have a syntax error, like I do, you'll get a pop-up window. As you can see here, it says syntax error, unexpected end of file. EOF means end of file while parsing. So all you have to do is just either X out or hit OK. And you see I have a red line in my program now. And what it is it's on the print statement because the cursor went to this number 3. I've got print, parenthesis, my function, parenthesis 3, parenthesis, but I forgot to close out the print statement with another parenthesis, another closing parenthesis. And when I add that closing parenthesis, notice this all turns highlighted gray, which is telling me, okay, everything's fine now. So I'll do run module. Okay, and now the error goes away. And if you look in the Python shell, I return and print the number 15. All right, so let's do one more. So now I want to do another print, and I'm going to call my function again. I'm called my function, name my function. Parenthesis. Now I'm going to do the number 5. Parenthesis. So now, now I'm going to print out 15 for this first print and this first call of my function. And then it's going to print out 5 times 5 is 25. So it's going to print out 25 for the second print of the call of my function. Run module. Okay. And if you look in the Python shell in the bottom, it generated 15 and 25. It's beautiful. So functions, that covers most of what you want to do with functions. And we've come to the end of the first session of Advanced Python, and offered to you by the Clifton Park Half Moon Library. And I hope to feel free to ask me any questions through Google Classroom for those of you that registered with the library and have been invited via your email. And I look forward to covering a whole bunch of other more advanced features of Python in our next session. All right, thanks a lot for joining me.